Hello. This synopsis is about Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is a short chapter and it deals with economies of scale and economies of scope. So you're probably familiar with the term economies of scale. When a business is achieving economies of scale, it just means that as they're producing more of the same good, the average costs are falling. And so as a company produces more and more for several different reasons, one being that there's a learning curve, they become more efficient at the process, and just the fact that they can, as you produce more, with certain production processes, you can lower your average costs. So when you're producing more and average costs are becoming lower, we say that they're achieving economies of scale. And there's a limit to that, which we'll talk about in this chapter. Okay, so the main point of this chapter is talking about economies of scale. So just to repeat, as you produce more of the same good, if average costs fall, that's economies of scale. But eventually, firms are going to face increasing average costs as they increase output. So this, in other words, this economies of scale, or this decreasing average costs as you produce more, doesn't go on for infinity. It doesn't last forever. There's a point when you have these decreasing average costs, but eventually your average costs are going to turn higher. So why is that? Well, that phenomenon is called the law of diminishing returns. So basically what they're saying is you have your plant, your capacity is fixed in the short run. So let's say you produce face masks. Let's say that you were producing face masks that you were selling at Lowe's and Home Depot for people, doing construction projects. COVID-19 hits. All of a sudden, there's this huge demand for face masks. So you retool and you're going to market to the public in general, not just to people doing projects around their house. So you produce more face masks. And you're achieving economies of scale. You have lowering average costs, but there's only so many people you can fit in that plant to make the face masks. There's only so much machinery you can fit in that plant. So eventually you're going to have people falling all over each other trying to produce these face masks, and it's just not efficient. And so eventually you're going to have these increasing returns. You're going to have decreasing returns to scale. Your average cost is going to increase. So what they're saying here is that this law of diminishing returns is a short-run phenomenon, though, because let's go back to the face mask example. In the short run, you're restricted by the capacity of your fixed plant and equipment. But in the long run, you could build a new plant. You can add more equipment. So this law of diminishing returns, it's only a short-run phenomenon, because in the long run, you can increase capital, which means you can increase your machinery, expand your plant, and so forth. So in the long run, these fixed costs actually become variable costs, because you can increase your fixed costs in the long run, but not in the short run. Short run means a year or less, long run meaning more than a year. All right, so make sure you read about economies of scale in the chapter. Make sure you read about the law of diminishing returns. All right, and then synergy, basically, if we say 1 + 1 equals more than 2, or 2 + 2 is greater than 4, what we mean is that when a company has achieved economies of scale or economies of scope, which we'll talk about later, they have produced a synergistic effect, or they've produced a synergy. They're experiencing synergy, and synergy is achieved when the combination of efforts are greater than if these efforts were done separately. And so synergy is just basically when you combine a task, that you achieve a greater output than if you were doing it separately. Okay, and then also remember in this chapter, they're talking about marginal revenue and marginal cost again. So remember from a prior chapter, marginal revenue is the increase in revenue from the increase in production of one product. Marginal cost is the increase in cost from the production of increasing the production of one product. So again, they're talking about marginal revenue and marginal cost in this chapter. And the point that they're making here is that if marginal revenue is decreasing, this implies that marginal cost must be increasing and vice versa. So if marginal cost is decreasing, then marginal revenue is increasing. And so remember, there's average costs, average revenue, and then there's marginal cost and marginal revenue. And the average cost includes your fixed costs, whereas the marginal cost does not include the fixed costs. That's just the cost of producing one more product, does not include the fixed costs. All right, now, when we say, let's go back to this economies of scale. When we say that we're achieving economies of scale, what's happening is this: our long run average costs are decreasing. Well, they're talking about long run here, so I'm sorry. Economies of scale is short run, so forget about that. This is talking about long run average costs. So let's look at these bullet points here. So it says here that, let's go to this one first. If long run average costs are decreasing, then you have increasing returns to scale. If long run average costs are increasing, you're going to have decreasing returns to scale. And then if your long run average costs are constant, you're going to have constant returns to scale. So it's just showing the relationship between long run average costs and returns to scale. So if long run average costs are constant, you're going to have constant returns to scale. If long run average costs are increasing, obviously your returns to scale are going to decrease. And then if long run average costs are decreasing, you're going to have increasing returns to scale. All right, next they talk about learning curves. So as I mentioned earlier in this synopsis, current production lowers future costs. What does that mean? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the more time that goes on, you get smarter. You find more efficient ways to produce things, and so current production, you're going to get better and find ways to cut costs and so forth. So generally, current production does lower future costs because there's a learning curve. You become more efficient, hopefully. All right, so that's all about economies of scale. At the end of the chapter, they talk about economies of scope. Economies of scope is when the cost of producing two things together is less than the cost of producing them separately. And so this is just showing this mathematically. So the cost of producing the quantity one and quantity two, let's say it's two different products. They were produced in two separate facilities or by two separate companies, what have you. They've combined the production. Let's just say it's two separate facilities. They combine it into one facility. They build a new plant and they combine it into one plant. And so they're producing these two items together. And the cost, if the cost is lower than when they were producing the two items separately, we've achieved economies of scope. Okay, so this is the main reason. This is one of the main reasons why companies merge. A company will buy another company out, or they'll merge. I mean, a merger, you tend to think of a merger as companies of equal size coming together, but a lot of times a merger is simply a company buying another company. But so anyway, companies acquiring other companies and also companies merging is one of the main reasons. This is one of the main reasons for mergers, because companies want to achieve economies of scope, this efficiency of producing things together. Okay, then obviously then diseconomies of scope would be if the cost of producing together is greater than the cost of producing separately. Okay, so this chapter is pretty short. Just make sure you understand economies of scale. All of these bullet points here, just take a look at these and read about them in the chapter. Make sure you have a good understanding of them. Okay, goodbye for now.